Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate being here today. Some of you may have seen this lecture before. I gave it a couple of years ago, shortly after the new History Museum opened. But it's a fun topic, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay. Do you want to dim the lights slightly, or?
I cannot dim, I can turn them off.
Okay. The topic is a headdress of pearls. Upon his appointment as governor, Captain General and Pacifier of New Mexico, Juan de Oñate was required to comply with the royal ordinances of 1573 regarding settlements in the New World. Oñate was required to supply people, arms, munitions, supplies, and other goods for the proper success and management of the expedition. Upon inspection in 1596, the personnel and goods amassed by Oñate were found wanting and not in compliance with the orders. The second inspection was held in Santa Barbara in 1597, and upon completion, the inspectors found Oñate more or less in compliance, and he was authorized to proceed to New Mexico. And this is something that, try to imagine Oñate and his followers setting off from Santa Barbara. The goods were carried in carros. Those who could rode horses, others walked, and as Chávez has said in the past, they proceeded to New Mexico at the pace of a pig. The slowest creature in the expedition. Can you see that? Yes. Okay. And here's, of course, the route of the Camino Real from Mexico City up into the United States, to San Gabriel. When Oñate left Santa Barbara, he traveled north over what would become known as the Camino Real. More than 1,800 miles in length, from Mexico City to Oñate, formerly San Gabriel, the Camino Real was the major route to the interior of Spanish New Mexico. Between Santa Barbara and El Paso, the Camino extended north through the Chihuahua Desert to El Paso del Norte, after which it paralleled more or less the Rio Grande as it flowed south. At La Bajada, the Camino diverged the large 2-ton supply wagons or carros that did not traverse the basaltic cliffs of La Bajada. Those on horseback followed the Santa Fe River, with wagons following the route that went along the Galisteo and eventually up San Marcos Wash and then north into Santa Fe. Sometimes they would swing back over toward the Santa Fe River, Las Golondrinas and the like, and come in on what became known as Camino de los Carros, or the what is now Cerrillos Road. In other cases, the route more or less paralleled the interstate as it went north into Santa Fe. And here you see the route from Santa Barbara up to San Gabriel. Here's a photograph of some of the swales that had been eroded from the Camino Real. This, is in the area of the sometime spaceport. The spaceport that got its start during the last administration. There's still archaeology going on in that area, and it's not quite ready to go. Anyway, among the goods declared by Oñate were 32 arrobas, and you'll hear me use the word arroba periodically. That was a Spanish measurement equal to about 25 pounds. But anyway, 32 arrobas and 12 pounds of iron made into small sledgehammers, bars, picks, and mallets, appraised at 4 reales per pound, 406 pesos. Iron for making into sheets, rods, barrel hoops, 1 arroba and 20 pounds of steel, that wasn't in contract, nails, leather shoes, reams of paper, 4 barrels of wine. Now, you will notice that there's quite an emphasis on iron. At the time, and as a matter of fact, all the way up until 1821, iron was a monopoly. It was controlled by the Spanish crown. So there was no mining of iron in New Mexico or elsewhere unless it was specifically controlled. And all iron that we had here had been shipped in. Now, there is an archaeological site at Comanche Springs, south of Albuquerque, where it appears there was a short-term operation. Somebody was mining bog iron in 1660. Obviously, there wasn't much iron there, and it was not a very successful operation. But we have unmistakable evidence of that in the archaeological record. In addition to thousands of beads and other goods, Oñate brought with him medicines, including 14.5 pounds of sarsaparilla, green ointment, rose extract, balsam, rose water, Toledo treacle, alum, verdigris, which can be highly poisonous. On June 30th, 1598, Oñate and his followers on horseback reached San Felipe and then San Domingo, where the Convento de Nuestra Señora de la Asunción was to be located. San Domingo would eventually become the ecclesiastical center of New Mexico. On July 11th, Oñate reached the pueblo, which we called San Juan. But the carts containing supplies did not reach San Juan until August 18, 1598. Now, the interesting thing about this, and this is something that I have puzzled about for some time, Oñate knew exactly where he was going. There were no stops on the way. He headed straight for San Juan. I think in part because Oñate was himself a miner and a descendant of miners. His father was instrumental in the huge silver discovery in Peralta. During the Coronado expedition in 1540-42, when Coronado and his followers were at San Juan, they reported seeing pots of shining metal, which I can only think were translated at the time into silver, maybe gold. In any case, the pots of shining metal almost certainly were in fact vessels, locally made vessels filled with mica that was used for souls and ceramics. After visiting nearby pueblos and marveling at the hot springs in the Headdress, on August 11th, Oñate and his followers, assisted by some 1,500 Indians, began work on the irrigation ditch for the city of Our Father. Now that irrigation ditch was, although people have said that it was at San Juan Pueblo itself, it was actually at San Gabriel. And there are several reasons why the ditch was one of the first things constructed when Oñate got out there. One, and this is one of the most important things, while you can make adobe bricks and transport them without a great deal of difficulty, you cannot transport the mortar that is needed to put those bricks together into a structure. You have to have a source of water very close by to make the mortar to build your buildings. And so the ditch system that was started in August of 1598 was at San Gabriel, and the ditches that are there now are remnants of those early ones. Once they had water on site and made their adobe bricks and their mortar, the church was started on August 23rd. And it was large enough to accommodate all the people at the camp. Here is a bird's-eye view of San Gabriel under excavation during the early 1960s when Florence Ellis of the University of New Mexico Mexico, held a field school at San Juan for several years. This actually is only a very small portion of the site. Of course, the site is almost occupied today by the homes of people living in San Juan. Another photograph of the excavations in place. Okay, now we get into the real issue. In 1600, the Oñate contract was modified and reinforcements were authorized to assist with the conversion of the natives and settlements in New Mexico. Among the goods sent to Juan de Oñate at San Gabriel were 2 cast iron beds, 4 pieces of artillery, 12 muskets, 12 fort rests, 12 powder flasks, and 12 small powder flasks. Also included were boots, shoes, horse gear, and a wide variety of cloth and clothing. 6 reams of paper were among the supplies, in addition to numerous fine hats. One of the hats sent to Don Cristobal, that is Oñate's son, was described as a fine brown hat with braid of gold and large pearls and set with stones of various colors and brilliancy. The hat was valued at 130 pesos. And here is a print of a soldier with matchlock, circa 1598 or 1597, just the year before the Oñate expedition. More men at arms, and these individuals are wearing clothing appropriate to the time, with the helmets and carrying matchlocks and pipes. Among the new colonists were Captain Antonio Conde de Herrera with his wife, Doña Francisca Galindo, their children, brothers, and sisters-in-law. Antonio brought with him 5 horses with complete armor, a coat of chainmail, a beaver and helmet, an arquebus and accessories, 2 gilded swords and dagger, a leather shield, 3 sickles, half an arroba of powder, 7 men's suits of wool mixture, coarse cloth and silk, and 3 fine hats, 18 pairs of Cordovan shoes, 2 pairs of buskins, 4 pairs of boots, some additional buskins, 2 pairs of house slippers, 4 pairs of fine woolen stockings, and 2 pairs of taffeta garters. En route, when they got to San Gabriel, the family lived in a woolen field tent with a ridge pole. They had a camp bed, 8 small chairs, 1 Michoacan table, 2 large water barrels, and a tub for washing. They also brought a barrel of wine, vinegar, 2 jars of olives, 1 of lard, 1 of honey, sweetmeats, sun-dried raisins, almonds, walnuts, 10 boxes of a confection of nuts and honey, and a kettle of refined sugar. These people were bringing their culture with them as they left Mexico for the unknown. This is a photograph of a man's jerkin, circa 1580, of the sort that would have been seen at San Gabriel. Shoes. Doña Francisca Galindo is taking 9 dresses, 2 of brown and green cloth, trimmed, another of velvet adorned with velvet belts and gold clasps, another of black satin with silk gimps, another of black taffeta trimmed, another of green coarse cloth with sashes embroidered in gold, another of crimson satin embroidered in gold, another of red satin with sashes and gold trimmings, another of tawny color with a white china embroidered skirt, 2 silk shawls with bead tassels, 4 pairs of thin wool sleeves, 1 damask and 1 velvet hoop skirt, 4 ruffs, 4 gold coiffures, 12 plain bonnets, 3 pairs of fancy cuffs, 1 necklace of pearls and garnets with a large gold cross, a headdress of pearls with a gold image of Our Lady, and many other things suitable for the adornment of women in the home. And this poor woman ended up at San Gabriel. She must have just been, well, can you imagine all of them? And here is a wonderful portrait of Caterina, Duchess of Savoy, with a headdress of pearls. Here's this is a Spanish farthingale of the early 17th century, late 16th, early 17th century. And can you see this at San Gabriel? Now, the next one. Okay, this is a very famous portrait.
Which is the farthingale? Is that the whole dress? Or?
Oh, no, let me show you. Okay, the skirt is called a farthingale. The way it is,
Underskirt.
the farthingale is an apparatus that you wear under your skirt to hold it out from your waist. This is the later farthingale. This is one of the infantas in the Spanish court. This is a portrait from the Velázquez paintings. But these farthingales were so wide that they had hinges, and you could push on the farthingale itself, and the skirt would fly up on the sides so that the individual wearing the outfit could walk through a door. I honestly don't think that we had any of these really extraordinary farthingales up here. I just can't see that. And again, who knows? One of the items recovered from the excavations at San Juan is this ivory. Well, it was described originally as a piece of a gun stock when it was uncovered by Florence Ellis and her students. I think after having looked at the item, which is engraved and carved with the scene of a walled medieval city from Europe of some sort, a walled medieval city in Europe, that this item probably decorated a chest or something like that rather than a gun stock. It's an extraordinary piece, as with all of the items that were recovered from the excavations of San Gabriel. They belong to San Juan Pueblo, but they are loaned to the Maxwell Museum. At the same time, the Doña Francisca Galindo came up here. Other items were brought to San Gabriel for Don Oñate: a gilded sword, a dagger with gold and silk, a suit of Florence cloth with gold trimmings and other things, a green damask bedspread, finished on both sides with fringes of silk and gold, valued at 70 pesos. 2 pipes of wine, valued at 280 pesos. Special foods brought to Juan and Cristobal Oñate by the reinforcements included 80 small chocolate boxes that cost 4 pesos each, 4 pounds of saffron, 1 arroba of pepper, a keg of conserve, dried squash, 60 boxes of quince and peach preserves, weighing 6.5 arrobas, that's over 150 pounds. Another large box with 86 additional small boxes of quince and peach preserves, which weighed 9 arrobas. Now remember, an arroba is 25 pounds. And then, my favorite. This is my favorite object. You've all seen it, but this is my favorite artifact in the collections of the Laboratory of Anthropology in Vienna. This is the Pecos cat, and the Pecos cat is the ceramic head of a cat. It's life-size, with a mouse in its mouth. And this delightful item was recovered by Jesse Nussbaum during his excavations of the convento at Pecos Pueblo in 1915, while A.P. Kidder was off excavating the rest of Pueblo. For many years, this item really has not been exhibited the way it should. I think it's just charming. It has glazed flowers. These are lead glazed flowers on its cheeks and on the tips of its ears. Someday, I would love to see that glaze tested, because I think the lead for the glaze was probably mined in Mexico, and this is a piece of a Mexican ceramic. And the reason I'm showing it is because it's ironic that the mice at San Gabriel were reported as not liking Spanish cheese. And of course, this would have been, they would have brought hard cheeses up with them as they were en route. But when they got to San Gabriel, they could go ahead and make soft cheeses once they had, they were no longer on the march. For reasons that we don't understand, with the exception of the jars used to transport oil, vinegar, olives, and similar items to New Mexico, none of the ceramics recovered from the excavations at San Gabriel, the Chinese porcelains, the Spanish lusterwares, and other non-local earthenwares were mentioned in any of the inventories of the Oñate expedition or those of the reinforcements of 1600. In fact, it was not until 1630 and the inventories of the mission supply service, when each mission was to receive a box of Rosa de Puebla, Mexican Mayola, every 3 years, and ceramics were mentioned in the documents on a regular basis. Also, even though chocolate had become extremely popular in Mexico by the late 16th century, there is only that one mention of it in any of the Oñate documents. Given repeated mentions of sugar and the presence of shards of small, handleless cups of Chinese porcelain, we surmise that chocolate was consumed by at least some of the settlers of San Gabriel. By the middle of the 17th century and throughout the 18th century, chocolate was mentioned on a routine basis in New Mexico. Okay, now these are examples. Down here in the corner are teeny tiny sherds of Chinese porcelain that were found at San Gabriel. The designs on those teeny tiny sherds are reminiscent of the designs on this vessel and then on these vessels. Having spent more than 600,000 pesos in the settlement of the colony, and in the face of growing unrest over his lack of leadership, Oñate sent a letter of resignation to the Viceroy in August of 1607. Oñate's resignation was accepted in February 1608, and Juan Martinez de Montoya was appointed governor. However, the Cabildo, the town council, refused to accept Martinez's leadership, preferring that of Cristobal Oñate. Finally, on March 30th, 1609, Pedro de Peralta was appointed governor and was issued instructions by the Viceroy to settle the villa that has been ordered built, so that they, the Spanish colonists in New Mexico, may begin to live with some order and decency. Now, this is a photograph of a late 16th, early 17th century ivory sundial, pocket sundial. This is the sort of tool that would have been used to lay out the city of the Villa of Santa Fe. Ironically, when Jess Nussbaum excavated for the new Fine Arts Museum, or the Museum of Art, in 1917, as he excavated beneath the parts of the Presidio for the Villa of Santa Fe, and he got down to the earliest levels on a floor at a depth of 8 feet. Nussbaum uncovered an ivory pocket sundial. I have searched, everybody has searched for that item in the collections. It no longer exists. I would love to see it. I think it probably would have looked something like this. But it's one of those things that Fray just didn't make it. That sundial, though, would have aided, as I said, in laying out the city. And of course, everybody's familiar with this. The map drawn by Lieutenant Jose Urrutia when he was here in Santa Fe between 1766 and 1768. It usually was the date of 1764. I found out earlier this year, I had been asked to give a talk by Mary Jean Cook to the residents at El Castillo. And Mary Jean asked if I would talk about the Urrutia map. And I said I would be delighted. And I said, by the way, Mary Jean, do you have any idea why the Urrutia map is in the collections at the British Museum? And Mary Jean said, no, we're going to find out. So Mary Jean called the late Dick Brusil and said, okay, why is the Urrutia map in the British Museum? And Dick got to work, bless him, before he died. And he tracked down the reason that the Urrutia map is in London. And it's a very complicated story, but during the late 18th century, I'll see that you get a copy of this too, Thomas, for the library. You need it. During the late 18th century, one of the members of the Spanish court, for reasons, well, in order to keep maps and other documents from Napoleon, began to assemble this huge collection of Spanish maps and law that apparently included all of the Urrutia maps. Urrutia not only mapped Santa Fe, but he did the presidios throughout the northern frontier of Spain. And this was a huge collection. In the early 18th century, the owner of the collection decided that he wanted to sell his collection that he had, acquired. And so he approached the British. This was about 1820. And they were interested, but not really interested. And the collector died, and his heirs went back to Britain, asked them if they would like this collection. They were only asking £3,000 on British currency. And after years of going back and forth, by, I believe it's 1840, the entire collection of Spanish maps was purchased by the British Museum for the princely sum of £300. And the maps have been in the British Museum, actually the British Library. Among other things that, in 1613, Pedro de Peralta, the new governor of New Mexico, found himself embroiled in an altercation with the church in Santa Fe. And one morning in June, Peralta went to Mass to find that his chair, the symbol of his civic authority, had been removed from the church by church officials and had been thrown into the street. Peralta had people assist him. The chair was brought back into the church, and he sat underneath the choir loft with the Indians who were attending Mass until the service was completed. It's a fascinating, and actually I've gone into detail on this particular item in various other places, but the church that they were talking about was the parochial. It was not San Miguel, and this is the earliest description of the church in Santa Fe that we have.
Do you know why it was thrown out?
It's 1613.
Do you know why it was thrown out? And he transgressed for what?
because he had, at that point, the Inquisition had already arrived in New Mexico, and Oñate was interfering in church business. And so he had been up in Taos, and when he came back, church officials were just furious. They excommunicated him, and he was informed when his chair was no more.
Who was the parish priest or parish church located?
The parish church, to the best of our knowledge, was located in the area of the present Cathedral Basilica. We have searched for it repeatedly. As a matter of fact, Jim Moore from the Office of Archaeological Studies is presently doing recovery at the east end of Cathedral Park, where I thought the church was located. We do have 17th century architecture in the area, but nothing church-like at this point. Given Jim's previous testing in the area, I think now, and I may be wrong, that the original church was probably located under what is now the area of the altar and the sanctuary for the present cathedral. Fray Alonso de Benavides was appointed custodian of Franciscan New Mexico in 1623 and immediately began to prepare for the journey to the colony. When Benavides finally arrived in Santa Fe on January 24th, 1626, he brought with him the bulltoe known today as La Conquistadora, or Our Lady of Peace, along with an altar screen for La Parroquia, the parish church. Benavides also brought crucifixes, missals, brass candlesticks, snuffing scissors, and many other items for the missions in New Mexico. And here is a photograph of La Conquistadora in a much later altar screen. Because he was the custodian of New Mexico missions, Benavides brought much needed supplies with him. Some of those supplies were frontals for altars of Chinese damask with the borders of brocatelle and fringes of silk lined with linen at 35 pesos each. Half an arroba of incense, copal, oil-painted images with gilded ornamental frames, and 11 Turkish carpets at 13 pesos each. And here is a contemporary 17th century Turkish carpet. Benavides brought quantities of spices, herbs, and other things for the missions, including arobas of hard cheese, dried shrimp, haddock, olives, capers, lavender, rosemary, white sugar, cinnamon, and 5 pounds and 3 ounces of saffron at 17 pesos and 4 tolines per pound. And this is a modern bottle with 2 grams of saffron. The current market value of saffron ranges from $171 to $175 an ounce. At today's prices, not accounting for inflation, the saffron brought to New Mexico by Benavides would have cost in excess of $14,000. And this came up regularly every 3 years on the mission supply service. Now, the saffron has both medicinal value or quantities in it, and it can be used as a dye. And so, 6 of one, half dozen of the others, what they were using for. I ate it. And I had mentioned Mexican Mayolica. These 3 handleless cups, small bowls, such as would be used for drinking chocolate, were recovered from, all 3 of these pieces were recovered from Abo Mission in the sailing pueblos. And they are Big Springs polychrome, Abo polychrome, named for the site of Abo, and San Luis Blue and White. We found quantities of sherds of these three types of majolica in our excavations in the palace years ago. We also found quantities of this Pueblo polychrome. This is a brio. It was made in Mexico prior to 1680. This particular type of Mexican myolica appears in New Mexico in sites that were occupied prior to the Pueblo revolt. It is one of the finest temporal markers we have. These two sherds are the only two sherds of this type of myolica that have been recovered in New Mexico. They are called La Traza polychrome. It is a Spanish myolica. We call it the knobby pot because of these little knobs in the back of it. And these sherds were recovered from the floor of the mission at San Marcos. And what's ironic, this is a fairly early type. It's a late 16th century myolica. And San Marcos was the last of the missions founded in New Mexico. Many of you have seen photographs of these wonderful sherds. These were recovered from our excavations in room 5, the west end of the palace. They're cobalt blue Chinese porcelain. If you look very carefully, you can see that they have remnants of designs of fern leaves and the like, fern fronds in gold leaf. This was a very rare type of porcelain when it was manufactured initially in the 17th century. There's some debate whether it is Chinese or Japanese, but I envision Governor Lopez de Mendizábal and his wife drinking chocolate here in the palace from this cup and others like it prior to their being sent to Mexico by the Inquisition in the 1660s. This is another example. This was not found here, of course. This is an example in the English collection of the same cobalt blue porcelain with the gold leaf design. Silver plates, silver forks. This fork, which is on exhibit at the palace and has been for many, many years, was recovered from the excavation for the sewer line in front of one of the excavations for the sewer line in front of the palace. Here we have crucifixes and candlesticks. There are many reports and documents of candlesticks and crucifixes here in the 18th century. We uncovered this button, which is identical to the button seen on the portrait of this woman. And this is the earring that I recovered, or we recovered, in room 7 of the palace. And this is the earring that was recovered by Steve Post during his excavations for the New History Museum. At room 5, excuse me. You were no one in Santa Fe or New Mexico if you didn't have a barbaino or boxes from Michoacan. They are again mentioned repeatedly in the documents. As a matter of fact, Doña Teresa brought with, and her husband, Lopez de Mendizábal, brought with them barbanos for sale in the store in the palace. Clothing. This particular garment is trimmed with gold galloon. You can see all over. When we found quantities of gold galloon, gold and silver galloon in our excavations in the storage pits in the west end of the palace. So when people would come to look over our shoulders as we were excavating and say, have you found gold yet? The crew would always say yes. We had. Okay, this is a Chinese porcelain plate with quite a history. This particular plate was recovered by Earl Morris in the early 20th century during his excavation of Three Corn Ruin, a Navajo pueblito in the Gobernador area of north central New Mexico. It's obvious that the vessel had been brought to New Mexico by the Spanish, and during the Navajo raid, it was collected by the raiders and taken off to Three Corn to be found several centuries later. Three Corn and Old Fort are two, Old Fort is another Navajo pueblito. And during the Morris excavations, it's amazing the Spanish materials that they uncovered. Hawks bells, thousands and thousands and thousands of trade beads, and metal goods. Really two amazing sites. Prior to her death in 1749, Lugarda Quintana of Santa Cruz owned several pieces of Chinese porcelain, in addition to a pitcher from Alcazar. A royal ceramics factory was established in Alcora, Spain in 1747, where this particular pitcher was made. We have no idea what Lugarda's pitcher looked like, but this is a chocolate pot, and it may have resembled this piece. As I told you, you were nobody in Santa Fe if you didn't have a chest from Michoacan. This is the base of a candlestick, one of two candlesticks that were recovered from the excavations at San Gabriel. Additional candlesticks. This is sort of similar to the base. These are 18th century. That is late 16th century, the previous one. This one's late 16th century. And these are 18th century, 19th century. And then this is one of the iron is one of the few items that is not thought of as a luxury good. However, it was a luxury good as far as New Mexico is concerned. As I mentioned before, iron was a monopoly that was controlled by Spain, and so iron was very short supply. This is one of the most incredible documents. This is a report to the Viceroy by the Cabildo of Santa Fe in February of 1639. And the Cabildo said, iron tools for cultivating and plowing the land are especially needed. In particular, iron for horseshoes, for without it, it is not possible to make any primitive expedition, as the enemy lives in rough mountainous country and on stony mesas. But no iron has been sent since the year 1628. Consequently, we are perishing without a pound of iron or a plow. For the love of God, Your Excellency, do us the favor and charity to order this assistance to be sent. Iron was so precious in Spanish colonial New Mexico, scraps of worn-out tools were hoarded until sufficient amounts could be saved to be reworked into horseshoes and a variety of tools. Such collections of scrap iron appear again and again and again in wills and inventories of all classes of New Mexico. It is not unusual to see somebody in a will say that they are leaving a half pound or a half a rolla of iron and a rolla or something like that. It was hoarded and it was saved and it was reworked and reworked and reworked. And here are some horseshoes, thanks to Robin Gavitt, Spanish Colonial Arts, and then various tools, blades, and then these are chispas, stripelites, and I think probably on exhibit is one of my favorite chispas, which was made of a rasp, more tools. Now, of course, this is copper, but with tobacco flasks and all sorts of tools. And then finally, luxury goods also include seeds, and in this case, rose bushes. One of my favorite documents says, this is describing property in Santa Fe in 1711. The property boundaries were included, and on the west, the house and garden lot was bounded by bushes of roses of Castile. There they are. That was the house of Magdalena de Ogama, or the house that Magdalena de Ogama sold to Salvador Montoya. Magdalena de Ogama was fascinating. She came up with the reinforcements of 1694 with Juan País Hurtado, and she was the sole woman who worked on the restoration of San Miguel Pueblo. She was the cook for the crews who were restoring San Miguel Church. She was the cook for the crews who were working on the church in 1710, and very important in Santa Fe. That is the end.
Is there still excavation going on?
Not here, but yes, there's still excavation going on in downtown Santa Fe. As I said, Jim Moore from the Office of Archaeological Studies, which is part of the museum system, is presently doing data recovery over here at the east end of Cathedral Park. Drury Southwest will begin working on the transformation, and they're not going to change it, but the transformation of St. Vincent's Hospital into a hotel. Eventually, as the economy improves, they are going to, Drury plans to restore Marion Hall completely to the verandas and everything else as part of this new hotel in downtown Santa Fe. All of their plans have gone through the Historic Design Review Board, and they have been approved, and they're ready to go. They are not going to demolish the hospital or the Marion Hall.
That's great. We'll have to patronize for
Any other questions?
Yeah, that heartrending plea for more iron, I didn't quite understand what you said about the iron was controlled by the Spanish government. Like, could they have produced their own iron here? It was a money-making?
No, it was not. No, for one thing, we didn't have much iron. There are some bog iron, but no. Iron, the production of iron, the mining of iron, and making of tools was a monopoly, or production of iron, was a monopoly that was controlled by Spain. They were in charge of bringing iron to the New World, and it was very, very strictly controlled. That monopoly was not lifted until 1821, when Mexico declared independence of Spain, and at that point, shortly thereafter, when the Santa Fe Trail opened up, all the traders had to do was to bring iron objects with them, and they sold out completely. It was curated, it was hoarded, iron was a luxury good.
I noticed at the beginning when you talked about San Gabriel, it was built with the assistance of 1,500 Indians.
The safety system.
Have they been the natives there or the Indians that came with them?
Good question. I'm assuming that they commandeered just as many local Indians as they had Indians with them. We do know that they had Mexican Indians with them. We have a couple of names. We don't really know how many there were, but no, it was the natives who would have been put to work digging this the Spanish engineered the safety system. Yes.
What was a pipe of wine?
That is a measure of wine, and I can't tell you the quantity in a pipe. I'll have to look that one up, I'm sorry.
And how much was a peso worth approximately?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, I think people will estimate it. I don't know. Yeah.
More than today.
Yes.
You heard your way.
The English grants were not allowed the English settlers on the East Coast to have iron mines, and they didn't have iron mines until the Revolution.
That's right.
So they followed through the
Yeah.
same way.
Yes, Elizabeth.
So I know we're dealing with the people who wore pearls as an everyday thing, bless their hearts, but I'm kind of curious also about what the Just Folks wore, because that's quite a get-up, and I know the Just Folks wore a version of that.
Well,
Do we have any
the
reference?
fact of the matter is there were just folks, and along with the Oñate expedition. And you have to go through the inventories, but everybody was wearing clothes that looked similar. I mean, they may not have had the quantities of gold galloon or silver galloon or something, but the styles were similar. I mean, that's what everybody was wearing. I one time gave a lecture and somebody asked about the costumes. And I said, no, these are not costumes. This is the clothing of the time. And that's exactly what it is. The styles were similar, the fabrics and the trim different. Yes?
Do you have any idea how many sheep came up in Tampa? Because that would have,
There are counts, I think, in the Oñate documents, but I haven't sat down to go through that particular, come up with counts, Pat. You might look at some of John Baxter's work, because I think he probably has counts there.
because I was thinking the clothing would, spin off, literally spin off.
Yeah.
Exactly, from and food.
I have the same question about cows.
Yes, they were bringing livestock, ganado mayor and minor, cattle, sheep, goats, chickens. I wouldn't call it chickens or livestock, no, but anyway. Chickens were brought by the missionaries, in particular the Franciscans, because both fowl and their eggs were used for medicinal purposes. Yes.
Does the iron have a stress factor in using it over and over again?
I'm sure it does. Or, no, you're shaking your head, Susan.
No, they would have melted it down and re-put it and made it into new things, and that would remove it. The one problem is rust.
But not so in Mexico.
What?
Oh, we still get rust.
Yeah.
Not so much a problem here than elsewhere.
Yeah, but rust is a must. You always have corrosion.
Did they have people with them to take care of those garments? Or
Well, they had servants, and many of the Mexican Indians who came up here with Oñate were servants of the Spanish. But no, you wouldn't have been able to, well, maybe they did work out some means by which they could, redo their ruffs and things like that. I don't think that's very well. And in the case of Conde de Herrera and Francisca Galindo, they were among those who deserted the colony in 1601. I mean, they just, as I said, when woman brought up her incredible wardrobe, she was really sort of, well, I just couldn't imagine her saying, and she didn't. Any other questions? Yes, one more?
If you were interested in getting a handle on metal, kind of in general, that was sort of coming up, and metal that existed in this part of the world, kind of early on. Where are those resources? I mean, where do you go to start looking for that kind of information?
We don't have much. We really don't. And certainly in my excavations at the palace, we would get rust. We would get lumps of rust. It was indistinguishable as far as what it was originally. We have some tools. There are some that were recovered archaeologically. We have some items in collections that have been, curated for hundreds of years.
It's David Vaughn's thesis.
Well, yes. Susan mentioned a thesis on mining in early New Mexico by David Vaughn. I don't know whether there's a copy here at the library. I have a copy at my office.
What was the name?
David Vaughn.
Vaughn.
It's a thesis.
There is a copy of the thesis in the library of the Library of Anthropology.
Okay.
Well, thank you all.